The morning calibration routine required 17 minutes. Vera's hands moved through the sequence without conscious thought. Sensor alignment, atmospheric readings, biomonitor synchronization. 8 months of identical mornings had carved the pattern deep into muscle memory. She didn't need to think. Thinking made the isolation worse. The research station's observation deck occupied a minimal footprint, efficiency prioritized over comfort. Metal surfaces, recycled air, the constant low hum of life support systems. Through the reinforced partition, the human habitat spread across 3 connected chambers designed to approximate Earth-standard environments. Whoever had programmed the simulation had never visited Earth. The colors were slightly wrong, the proportions artificial, the lighting too consistent. Subject 12 was awake. Marcus. He'd insisted on the name during intake processing, though the council preferred numerical designations. Vera had logged the preference and continued using the official designation in her reports. In her private notes, she wrote Marcus. He moved through his own morning routine on the other side of the glass. Physical exercise, push-ups, controlled breathing patterns, stretches that emphasized the muscular structure the collective found so fascinating. Human bodies were inefficient, prone to injury, requiring constant maintenance. They were also capable of rapid adaptation, emotional resilience under conditions that would break most sentient species, and biochemical complexity the collective's best geneticists couldn't fully replicate. Vera's chromatophores flickered involuntarily as Marcus completed his exercise sequence. She caught the color shift in her reflection on the monitor screen, pale blue bleeding into warmer tones. Attraction markers, compatibility signals her body produced without permission. She adjusted the atmospheric controls and forced her skin back to professional neutrality. The data streams scrolled across multiple displays: heart rate, hormonal fluctuations, neural activity patterns. Marcus produced readings the automated systems flagged as anomalous: elevated oxytocin during isolation periods, dopamine spikes with no external stimulus, cortisol levels that should indicate chronic stress but somehow stabilized within normal ranges. Humans adapted, even to this. Vera's own readings would show similar anomalies if she allowed the monitoring systems to track her during observation periods. She disabled personal biomonitoring during shifts, citing equipment interference. No one questioned it. The collective trusted her competence absolutely. That trust felt heavier each morning. The comm system chimed. Director Salvan's voice carried the usual clipped efficiency. Dr. Vera, Council request updated behavioral analysis. Subject 12 shows continued cooperation despite knowledge of program parameters. We need psychological assessment. Acknowledged, Vera said. Her vocal cords shaped the words correctly. No emotional leakage. Analysis will be ready by end of shift. She closed the channel and looked through the partition. Marcus was looking back. He shouldn't be able to see through the one-way barrier, but his eyes tracked her position with unsettling accuracy. His hand raised slightly, a small gesture that could mean anything or nothing. Vera's palm pressed against the cool glass before she registered the movement. 3 meters of reinforced barrier between them. Protocol maintained, completely safe. Her skin temperature was rising anyway. The ventilation alarm triggered during third shift, when only automated systems monitored the observation sector. Vera was in her quarters, reviewing data compilations when the emergency notification flashed across her personal terminal. Seal degradation in observation deck air exchange system. Unfiltered atmospheric cross-contamination between human habitat and research wing. She should have reported it immediately. Standard procedure required immediate lockdown, decontamination protocols, system purge. Instead, Vera pulled on her duty uniform and walked to the observation deck without activating the alarm sequence. The scent hit her the moment the door cycled open. Human pheromone markers. Complex organic compounds her olfactory system had been designed to detect and categorize across species barriers. Except these didn't just register as data. They bypassed her cognitive processing entirely and triggered responses buried in genetic sequences the collective had supposedly edited out 3,000 years ago. Her secondary nervous system flooded with sensation. Skin hypersensitivity, elevated core temperature, respiratory rate acceleration. The medical term was biological compatibility cascade. The experiential reality was standing in an empty room, breathing recycled air, and feeling her entire body recognize something it had never encountered before as essential. Vera crossed to the partition on unsteady legs. Marcus was asleep in the habitat's rest chamber, his body curled on the regulation sleep platform. Even through the barrier, even unconscious, his presence felt overwhelming. She activated the repair protocols remotely. The ventilation seal would self-correct within the hour. She could file a routine maintenance report, log the minor malfunction, continue as normal. No one would question it. Her hand was shaking against the glass. Vera pulled up Marcus's file on the nearest terminal. The data she'd reviewed hundreds of times suddenly felt different, each detail sharp and specific. Age 28, Earth Standard. Height 183 centimeters. Genetic markers indicating European and South American ancestry. Optimal health parameters. Psychological resilience scores in the 98th percentile. One of 53 humans remaining in collective custody. One of 12 selected for the reproductive management program. The file didn't mention that he made small jokes during sample collection procedures. That he asked questions about her homeworld, about collective culture, about whether she had chosen xenobiology or been assigned to it. That he never complained about the isolation, never showed anger at his situation, just adapted with quiet competence that reminded her uncomfortably of her own coping mechanisms. The ventilation system chimed completion, seal restored, atmospheric contamination purged. Vera stood in the sterile observation deck and felt the absence of his scent like a physical loss. The Council's directive came through official channels 3 days later. Direct contact trials, Phase 1 implementation, immediate start. Dr. Vera designated as primary contact researcher due to morphological compatibility with human structure and extensive observational data familiarity with Subject 12. She read the authorization twice, looking for the loophole that would let her refuse. Director Salvin delivered the briefing in person, unusual for someone at his administrative level. He stood in her laboratory space, his chromatic patterns cycling through formal bureaucratic neutrality, and explained the research parameters with clinical precision. "We need behavioral data under proximity stress conditions," Salvin said. "How humans respond to direct physical presence of other sentient species. You'll conduct graduated contact sessions, verbal interaction, shared environmental space, eventually supervised physical contact if the subject remains stable." "Physical contact violates protocol," Vera said. "Protocol is being revised." Salvin's skin flickered with something that might have been irritation if he still had access to such emotions. The collective needs this data. Humanity's biochemical advantages are useless if we can't understand the psychological framework that supports them. You have the most extensive observation hours with Subject 12. He trusts you as much as he trusts any of us. Trust. The word sat wrong in her thoracic cavity. "When does the first session begin?" she asked. "Tomorrow. Standard contact chamber, full monitoring suite, 2-hour session duration. Introduce yourself. Establish verbal communication patterns. Assess his response to your physical presence." Salvin moved toward the door, then paused. "The Council is pleased with your work, Dr. Vera. This research will save our species. Remember that when the protocols feel restrictive." He left before she could respond. Vera spent the rest of her shift preparing the contact chamber. Atmospheric calibration, biomonitor placement, sensor array activation. Technical tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind away from the memory of unfiltered air, carrying Marcus's scent, away from the physiological data she'd carefully excluded from official reports, away from the fact that she'd disabled her own biomonitoring 8 months ago because the readings would show exactly what the collective had engineered out of existence. That night, she stood in her quarters and practiced introducing herself out loud. Dr. Vera, lead xenobiologist, assigned to human observation and analysis. Her voice sounded wrong in the empty room, too formal, too distant. She tried again. Just Vera. Still wrong. She tried her actual name, the one her genetic lineage carried, the one no one had used since she'd entered professional service 15 years ago. The syllables felt strange in her mouth, like something that belonged to a different person entirely. The contact chamber was smaller than Vera had remembered. 3 meters by 4 meters, precisely calibrated to maintain the minimum safe distance while allowing full sensory observation. Marcus entered from the habitat side door, looking calm, curious, completely unafraid. Vera's biosuit registered her elevated heart rate and helpfully displayed the data on her internal heads-up display. She dismissed the readout and focused on maintaining neutral chromatic patterns. "You're the one who watches me sleep," Marcus said. His voice resonated at frequencies that made her thoracic cavity vibrate. The translation matrix in her auditory processing system struggled with the layered meaning: observation, accusation, something else entirely. Amusement, maybe. Humans were difficult to read even with comprehensive psychological training. "I monitor your biological rhythms during rest cycles," Vera said. "It's part of the research parameters." "Right. Research." Marcus stayed near his entry door, maintaining the 3-meter distance without being told. "Do I get to know your name? Or should I just call you the researcher?" "Dr. Vera." "That's a title and a last name." He tilted his head slightly, a gesture she'd seen him make during observation when he was thinking through complex problems. "Do you have a first name?" She did. It existed in her official records, unused for 15 years. "Vera is sufficient." "All right, Vera." The way he shaped her name with human vocal structures shouldn't have felt different from how her colleagues said it. It did. "I'm Marcus." "But you already knew that." The session parameters called for graduated conversation, baseline interaction analysis, assessment of mutual communication efficacy. Vera pulled up the prepared question sequence on her internal display and immediately forgot every planned query. "What happens to us after you figure it out?" Marcus asked, and the direct simplicity of the question cut through 17 layers of research protocols. She should have deflected, maintained professional distance, cited confidentiality restrictions. Instead, Vera told him the truth: the collective's fertility crisis. 3,000 years of genetic modification eliminating every biological inefficiency, including the messy chaos of unregulated reproduction. The careful discovery, too late, that efficiency and adaptability weren't compatible, that a species could engineer itself into evolutionary stagnation, that humanity, despite its primitive biology, possessed something the galaxy's dominant civilization had lost. Marcus listened without interrupting. His micro-expressions shifted in patterns she was starting to recognize: surprise, resignation, something that looked like sympathy, but probably wasn't. "So you need our genetic material," he said when she finished. "Our biology, not actually us." "Correct. And after you extract what you need?" "Preserved consciousness in controlled isolation. Genetic material utilized until diversity requirements are satisfied." The words came out flat, clinical, exactly as the Council had phrased them in her briefing documents. "How long does that take?" Marcus asked quietly. "Estimates vary. Decades, possibly centuries, depending on replication success rates." He absorbed this information with the same disturbing calm he'd shown during every interaction. No anger, no fear, just practical acceptance. Then he asked a question that wasn't in any research parameter she'd prepared for. "Can I see your hand?" "The biosuit maintains necessary—" "Without the suit," Marcus said. "Just your hand. I won't touch you if you don't want me to. I'd just like to see what you actually look like." Protocol forbade direct dermal contact. Risk of contamination, biochemical exchange, loss of experimental control. Vera's fingers were unfastening her glove before her cognitive processes could override the impulse. Her hand looked pale and strange in the chamber's artificial lighting. 4 digits instead of 5, chromatophores visible beneath translucent skin, the slight webbing between her fingers that marked her genetic lineage. She held it up, palm out, acutely aware of every sensor in the room recording this violation of basic research safety. Marcus raised his own hand, matching her gesture, maintaining the 3-meter distance. His palm was broad, calloused, marked with small scars that the intake medical team hadn't bothered to heal. Human biology's inefficiency, permanent damage records, proof of survival. "Can I come closer?" he asked. Vera's vocal cords wouldn't shape a refusal. She nodded. Marcus crossed the space between them slowly, stopping just within arm's reach, close enough that she could feel heat radiating from his body, could smell the pheromone markers that had flooded the observation deck during the ventilation failure. Her secondary nervous system cascaded into that same overwhelming response. Hypersensitivity, recognition, the feeling of her entire biology reaching towards something it had never encountered but somehow knew. "May I?" Marcus asked, his hand still raised, palm open, waiting for permission. Vera closed the final distance. His palm against hers generated data her biosuit sensors recorded in exhaustive detail. Temperature differential, electrical conductivity, pressure sensitivity. The measurements were accurate and completely irrelevant. What mattered was the rough texture of his skin, the steady pulse she could feel through contact points, the way his fingers curled slightly to maintain the connection. Her chromatophores flared bright blue without conscious control. Attraction markers, compatibility signals. Every alarm her professional training had built screaming that this was exactly what protocol existed to prevent. Neither of them pulled away. The sessions became routine. Every third day, 2 hours in the contact chamber, graduated proximity trials that pushed boundaries the council had carefully calculated. Verbal interaction, shared environmental space, supervised physical contact within defined parameters. Vera filed meticulously detailed reports that documented everything except what actually mattered. Marcus learned to read her chromatic shifts, the involuntary color changes that betrayed emotional states. Her voice kept carefully neutral. Pale blue for attraction, deeper blue for distress, green undertones for curiosity, the rapid flicker between patterns when she was overwhelmed. She'd spent 15 years training herself to maintain professional neutrality. He decoded her in 3 weeks. She learned his micro-expressions in return, the slight tension in his shoulders when council directives came through, the way his breathing changed, slower, deeper, when she entered the chamber, the specific angle of his head tilt when he was choosing his words carefully, trying not to say something that would end these sessions prematurely. They developed a vocabulary that existed outside language. His hand extended, not quite touching. Her brief response, fingertips brushing his palm. The monitoring systems recorded contact duration, pressure measurements, biomarker exchanges. The data failed to capture what was actually being communicated. Director Salvin reviewed the session recordings with increasing approval. "Excellent progress, Dr. Vera. The subject shows remarkable psychological stability under proximity stress. Continue current parameters." Vera acknowledged the directive and returned to the contact chamber the next day. Marcus was standing by the observation window when she entered, looking out at the dead moon's grey surface. "Do you ever go outside?" he asked. "I mean, outside the station. Actual planetary surfaces, different atmospheres, real environments instead of controlled simulations." "Field research was part of my early career," Vera said. "Before specialization." "Did you like it?" The question surprised her. No one asked about professional satisfaction. Work was genetic purpose, assigned function, contribution to collective survival. Personal preference was inefficient. "Yes," she said, and realized it was true. "I liked it very much." Marcus turned from the window. "What made you stop?" "Advancement required facility-based research, greater contribution to collective knowledge through specialized study." The official explanation sounded hollow in her own auditory processing. "That's what they told you," Marcus said. "What do you actually think?" Vera's chromatophores flickered through several patterns before settling into something between blue and green. "I think I made the choice I was designed to make." "Designed?" Marcus moved closer, not touching, just present. "You talk about yourself like your equipment." "Genetic optimization has been collective standard for 3,000 years. We're designed for specific functions, modified for maximum efficiency in our assigned roles. It's not a negative concept. It sounds lonely." The word hit something in her thoracic cavity that data analysis couldn't classify. Lonely. She'd never applied that term to her own experience. The collective provided purpose, structure, contribution to species survival. Emotional isolation was a feature, not a flaw. Attachments were inefficient. Connection was a liability. Marcus's hand was extended, palm open, the gesture that had become their ritual. Vera matched it without thinking, bringing her palm within millimeters of his, feeling the electromagnetic field interaction that the monitoring systems recorded but couldn't interpret. "You're not equipment," Marcus said quietly. "You're just afraid of what you might be if you weren't." She should have documented the statement as evidence of psychological instability. Instead, she closed the final millimeter of distance and felt his warmth against her skin. The ritual emerged organically, unplanned by either of them. At the end of each session before separation, they would stand closer than regulations technically permitted. Not touching, that would trigger immediate intervention from monitoring systems, but near enough that Vera could feel the heat Marcus generated, could smell the complex pheromone signature that made her cognitive functions deteriorate into pure sensation. He would raise his hand, palm open, and wait. She would match the gesture, bringing her palm within millimeters of his, sometimes maintaining the distance, sometimes closing it entirely. The almost contact felt more intense than any physical touch she'd experienced. Her entire awareness compressed into the space between their hands, the heat transfer, the potential energy of possible connection. The monitoring systems recorded everything. Elevated biomarkers, neurological activity consistent with pair bonding behaviors, hormonal profiles indicating deep attachment formation. Vera filed reports that documented physical data while carefully omitting emotional context. The council didn't need to know that she spent hours between sessions analyzing the recordings, watching Marcus's micro-expressions, trying to understand what he thought during those moments of almost touching. Director Salvin called her to his administrative office during off-shift hours. "The council has reviewed your recent session data. The biochemical exchanges during physical contact are exceeding initial projections. Whatever is happening between you and Subject 12 is producing exactly the kind of biological response data we need." Vera's chromatophores went carefully neutral. "The subject shows consistent cooperation. Stress responses remain within acceptable parameters." "We're not concerned about his stress responses," Salvin said. "We're interested in yours." The statement hung in the recycled air between them. "I don't understand," Vera said carefully. Salvin pulled up a data stream on his terminal, her bio-readings from the past 3 weeks, except she'd disabled personal monitoring 8 months ago. This data shouldn't exist. "The contact chamber has redundant monitoring systems," Salvin explained. "We've been tracking your responses alongside the subjects. Dr. Vera, you're experiencing a full biological compatibility cascade. The same genetic sequences we thought we'd eliminated from the collective genome 3,000 years ago. You're responding to human pheromone markers as if—" He paused, searching for appropriate clinical terminology. "As if you were biologically designed to bond with this specific individual." Vera's secondary nervous system was flooding with something the medical texts would classify as panic. "That's not possible. The genetic modifications are imperfect," Salvin interrupted. "We're discovering that the collective's genetic engineering didn't eliminate these response patterns. It merely suppressed them. Under sufficient stimulus, the original biology re-emerges." He closed the data stream. "This is extremely valuable research, Dr. Vera. Continue current contact parameters. We need to understand the full scope of the compatibility response. You want me to continue developing an attachment to Subject 12 so you can study it. We want you to continue excellent work that's providing crucial data for species survival," Salvin corrected. "Your personal comfort is secondary to collective need." Vera returned to her quarters and spent the sleep cycle staring at the ceiling, unable to activate rest state. Her body was betraying 15 years of disciplined control. Her biology was overriding her conscious purpose, and the collective was using that betrayal as a research opportunity. The next session, Marcus took one look at her and asked what was wrong. "Nothing," Vera said. "Routine session. Standard parameters." He didn't believe her. She could see it in the way his posture shifted, protective instinct activating despite the fact that she was his jailer, his researcher, the person documenting his biochemistry for eventual extraction and utilization. "You don't have to tell me," Marcus said, "but your colors are all wrong. You're scared." "I'm not experiencing fear." "Then what are you experiencing?" Vera's vocal cords shaped words she hadn't planned to say. "I don't know. I don't have training for this. The collective engineered these responses out of our genome. I'm not supposed to feel—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus crossed the space between them, closer than regulations permitted, close enough that she could feel his body heat. could see the small scars on his hands, could smell the pheromone markers that made her entire biology cascade into recognition and need. Feel what? He asked quietly. Any of this. Her chromatophores were cycling through patterns she couldn't control, every suppressed emotion bleeding through in visible color shifts. You. This. The fact that I spend hours between sessions analyzing recordings of your facial expressions. The fact that I disabled my biomonitoring 8 months ago because the data would show exactly what I'm not supposed to be capable of experiencing. And what's that? Vera looked at him, really looked, not through the clinical lens of research observation, but as one sentient being seeing another. That I care what happens to you. That the thought of you being transferred to the biological repository makes my cardiovascular system malfunction. That I'm supposed to be observing you objectively and instead I'm... Marcus's hand touched her face, gentle and specific, his palm warm against her cheek. The monitoring systems would be recording everything, flagging this contact as protocol violation, generating alerts that would reach Director Salvin within minutes. She didn't pull away. I know, Marcus said. I figured it out weeks ago. The way you watch me when you think I can't see. The way your colors change when I get too close. The way you always find excuses to extend the sessions just a few more minutes. His thumb brushed the edge of her chromatophore field, the touch sending sensation cascading through her secondary nervous system. You're not the only one who's supposed to be objective here. They're going to use this, Vera said. The Council. They're tracking my responses, using our attachment as research data. I know that too. Marcus's hand stayed against her face, steady and warm. Does it change anything? It should have. Professional ethics, research integrity, the entire purpose of protocol and distance and controlled observation. It should have mattered that the collective was documenting every moment of this, analyzing the biochemical cascade, treating her loss of professional objectivity as a convenient data source. No, Vera said. It doesn't change anything. Marcus smiled and she felt the expression like heat against her skin. They developed patterns that existed in the spaces between official sessions. Marcus would be working on the human habitat's small maintenance tasks, organizing supplies, calibrating environmental controls, the endless small activities that filled isolation time. Vera would route her observation monitoring through the habitat feeds, ostensibly checking system functions, actually just watching him move through his routine. Sometimes he would look directly at the cameras and raise his hand, palm out, the gesture that meant nothing and everything. Vera would find herself mirroring it against the monitor screen, her palm pressed to glass and metal, 3 chambers and dozens of meters between them. The official contact sessions expanded. 4 hours now, twice weekly, with graduated physical contact parameters that the Council approved with enthusiastic directives. They wanted more data on sustained proximity, on biochemical exchange patterns during extended interaction. They wanted to document what happened when 2 beings from genetically divergent species spent hours in shared space with no purpose except presence. What happened was conversation. About Earth before the collapse, about the collective's 3,000-year civilization, about the specific texture of real planetary atmospheres versus recycled station air, about small things, favorite foods, sleep patterns, the strange comfort of routine in empty spaces, about large things, the weight of watching your species die, the isolation of perfect genetic design, the question of whether consciousness mattered if your body was just biological material waiting for extraction. Marcus told her about his sister, who died in the final environmental cascade before the collective's evacuation ships arrived, about standing in emergency shelters, watching the sky turn colors, that Earth's sky was never meant to be, about the survivor's guilt that came with being genetically optimal enough for preservation when billions weren't. Vera told him about Genetic Assignment Day, when she was 14 cycles old, and the collective's screening determined her aptitude for xenobiology, about the optimization modifications that followed, enhanced olfactory systems, improved visual spectrum, cognitive processing upgrades for multi-species behavioral analysis, about the pride she'd felt being chosen for meaningful contribution, about the slow realization years later that choice and design weren't the same thing. They sat across from each other in the contact chamber. No research agenda, No protocol checklist. Just two beings existing in shared space. Marcus would extend his hand across the regulation distance. Vera would meet it halfway. They'd maintain that almost contact, millimeters apart, feeling the heat transfer and electromagnetic field interaction while monitoring systems recorded every biomarker spike and hormonal cascade. "Tell me something true," Marcus said during one session. "Not research data, not what the council wants you to believe, just something true about you." Vera's chromatophores flickered through uncertainty patterns. "I don't know how to distinguish anymore. What's true versus what I was designed to be. Start with something small. What did you eat for your last meal? Nutritional supplement, standard formulation. Did you enjoy it?" The question made no sense. Enjoyment wasn't a relevant parameter for caloric intake. It was efficient. "That's not what I asked." Vera looked at him across the small space between them. "No, I didn't enjoy it. I haven't enjoyed a meal since... I don't remember. Decades, maybe. Taste optimization was one of the modifications. More efficient to remove pleasure response than to waste cognitive resources on food preferences." Marcus's expression shifted into something that looked like grief. "They took that from you. Your people. The ability to enjoy eating. It's not taking, it's optimization." "It's the same thing." His hand stayed extended, palm open, waiting. What else did they optimize away? Too many things to catalog. Sexual response, inefficient distraction, familial bonding superseded by collective loyalty, creative expression beyond functional parameters, wasteful resource allocation, fear beyond appropriate threat response, emotional inefficiency, joy beyond professional satisfaction, unnecessary neurotransmitter expenditure. "Everything that made us like you," Vera said quietly. "Everything messy and inefficient and irrational. Everything that made us alive instead of just optimally functional." "You're still alive," Marcus said. "I can see it in your colors. Every time you fight to stay neutral and your skin shows what you're actually feeling. Every time you touch my hand and I watch your whole body respond. You're not optimally functional, Vera. You're real." She closed the distance between their palms. His warmth against her skin felt like evidence. "Director Salvin approved unlimited contact sessions effective immediately. The data you're generating is unprecedented, Dr. Vera. The Council wants comprehensive documentation of long-term attachment formation. Continue current parameters without restriction." Unlimited meant Vera spent more time in the contact chamber than her own quarters, meant Marcus became the constant in her routine instead of isolation and data analysis, meant the monitoring systems tracked everything. Every conversation, every touch, every moment when her chromatophores betrayed emotions she wasn't supposed to have. The collective was building a complete map of what happened when their genetically optimized biology encountered something that triggered the responses they'd thought they'd eliminated. Vera was the experimental subject as much as Marcus, her every biochemical cascade documented for future reproduction in controlled laboratory conditions. She didn't care anymore. Marcus was teaching her about human food culture, describing taste combinations, and cooking processes with detail that made her modified neural pathways struggle to process sensory information she'd never been designed to experience. She found herself imagining flavors she'd never tasted, textures her optimized palate couldn't appreciate, the simple pleasure of sharing a meal that wasn't just efficient caloric intake. "The thing about good food," Marcus said, "is that it's never just about nutrition. It's about time and attention. Taking something raw and transforming it into something better. It's inefficient as hell and completely worth it." "The collective would disagree," Vera said. "The collective is dying," Marcus replied. "Not cruel, just factual. You don't get to judge efficiency." He was right. 3,000 years of perfect genetic optimization, and the collective was facing extinction through its own calculated design. Humanity, with all its messy inefficiency, had lasted just as long before environmental collapse finally overwhelmed adaptation. The universe didn't reward efficiency, it rewarded survival, and survival required the exact chaos the collective had engineered away. Vera's hand found Marcus's palm, without conscious decision. The touch had become automatic, necessary, the way breathing was necessary. "What do you think happens to us?" she asked, "after the Council has all the data they need?" "You already told me. Biological repository, consciousness preservation, genetic extraction, Until I'm used up. I'm supposed to document your psychological response to that knowledge. Assess whether awareness of eventual termination impacts cooperation and biomarker production. And what does your documentation say? Vera's chromatophores cycled through blue and green, unable to settle into professional neutrality. That you're handling it with remarkable resilience. That human psychology adapts to impossible circumstances through emotional compartmentalization. That the threat of future harm is less impactful than present experience. That's the official assessment, Marcus said. What's the real one? That you're terrified. That you hide it because showing fear would make the waiting worse. That you focus on these sessions because they're the only thing in your existence that feels like choice instead of captivity. Her voice was shaking, vocal cords failing to maintain clinical distance. That I'm using the same compartmentalization, pretending this research has scientific purpose, instead of admitting I just want to be near you. Marcus's other hand came up, cradling her face with both palms, his warmth against her chromatophore fields, sending cascading sensation through her nervous system. The monitoring systems are recording this. I know. Salvin will use it in his reports, proof of successful attachment formation. Evidence that collective biology still carries bonding capacity. I know. Does it change anything? Marcus asked, echoing his question from weeks ago. Vera leaned into his touch, feeling his pulse through contact points, smelling his pheromone signature, letting her chromatophores flare bright blue without trying to suppress the response. No, it doesn't change anything. He kissed her then. The first time, gentle and specific, his lips against hers in a gesture that human culture coded as intimacy, but which felt like something deeper. Recognition, connection, the opposite of isolation. Vera's entire biology cascaded into response. Neurotransmitter floods, cardiovascular acceleration, the overwhelming sensation of her optimized body remembering what it had been designed to forget. The monitoring systems documented everything in exhaustive detail. Neither of them stopped. The sessions became something the Council couldn't precisely categorize. Still research, technically. Still generating unprecedented data on cross-species biochemical response patterns. But the clinical framework was collapsing under the weight of what was actually happening in the contact chamber. They touched constantly now, Marcus's hand in hers, his arms around her shoulders, her face against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Human contact patterns, holding, embracing, the physical closeness that human psychology required for emotional regulation. Vera's optimized biology had no framework for this kind of sustained physical intimacy. Her nervous system just adapted, treating Marcus's presence as necessary as atmospheric pressure. They talked about futures that wouldn't exist. What they'd do if the protocols didn't matter, if the Council's timeline didn't end in his transfer to biological repository and her return to standard research parameters. Marcus described Earth places he'd loved, ocean coastlines, mountain ranges, the specific quality of sunset light through old-growth forests. Vera described worlds she'd studied during field research, bioluminescent swamps, crystalline cave systems, the three-sun planet where shadows moved in patterns that looked almost like dance. Would you have chosen this? Marcus asked during one session. If the collective gave you actual choice, would you have wanted to be a xenobiologist? Vera considered the question seriously. I don't know. I was identified for the role at 14 cycles. Optimizations began immediately. By the time I was old enough to question it, the modifications were complete. The person I might have been without intervention doesn't exist anymore. She exists, Marcus said. I can see her in your colors. Every time you fight the optimization and let yourself feel something real. Feelings aren't reliable data. Feelings are the only data that matters. His hand was warm against her cheek, his thumb tracing the edge of her chromatophore field with careful attention. All of this, the research, the protocols, the desperate attempt to extract human biology and replicate it in controlled conditions, it's missing the point. You can't engineer connection. You can't optimize emotion. The collective is dying because you tried to separate survival from everything that makes survival worth it. Vera knew he was right, had known it for months, probably, since the ventilation failure that flooded the observation deck with his scent. Since the first contact session, when his palm touched hers and her entire biology recognized something it had never encountered, since she'd disabled her personal monitoring because the truth of what she was feeling couldn't survive documentation. "The Council approved transfer timeline today," she said quietly. 72 hours. After that, you'll be relocated to biological repository. I won't have access." Marcus's hand stilled against her face. 72 hours. Yes. And then what happens to you? Standard reassignment, new research parameters, possibly continued analysis of cross-species attachment formation using the data they'd generated. Her contribution to collective survival, documented and catalogued and stripped of everything that had made it real. "I continue my work," Vera said. "I fulfill my genetic purpose." "That's what they designed you to say." Marcus's arms came around her, pulling her close against him, her face against his shoulder, his warmth surrounding her completely. "What do you actually want?" The question shouldn't have been difficult. The collective engineered clear purpose into every genetic sequence. Vera knew exactly what she was designed to want. Professional satisfaction, contribution to species survival, the abstract fulfillment of optimized function. "This," she said against his shoulder. "I want this. You. More time. The ability to choose something for myself instead of accepting what I was designed to accept." "Then choose," Marcus said. The final permitted observation period stretched across 8 hours. Director Salvin had approved the extended timeline, recognizing that truncating the attachment formation data would reduce research value. Vera spent all 8 hours in the contact chamber, monitoring systems documenting every moment while the clock counted down to Marcus's transfer. They didn't talk much. Words felt insufficient compared to presence. Marcus held her against him, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her in the human holding pattern that signaled protection and possession and partnership. Her chromatophores cycled through blues and greens without conscious control, her biology broadcasting what her training had spent 15 years suppressing. "Tell me what happens after," Marcus said quietly. "Not the official version. What actually happens in the biological repository." Vera had reviewed the protocols, knew exactly what the preservation program entailed. Consciousness maintained in isolation tanks, neural activity preserved, self-awareness intact. Your body will be kept in medical stasis, tissue samples extracted on regular intervals, genetic material harvested and replicated. You'll be aware of all of it. For how long? Decades at minimum. Possibly centuries, depending on how long the collective needs your biology to stabilize their reproductive programs. Marcus's arms tightened around her. "And you'll just go back to your research. Analyze the data we generated. Move on to the next observation assignment. That's what I'm designed to do." "I'm not asking about design," Marcus said. "I'm asking about choice." Vera turned in his arms, facing him, close enough to see the small variations in his eye color, the specific texture of his skin, the warmth that radiated from him like evidence of actual living. "The collective doesn't recognize choice as separate from genetic purpose. What I want and what I'm designed to want are supposed to be identical. But they're not," Marcus said. "I can see it every time you look at me. You want something the collective never optimized you for." He was right, had been right for months, since before she'd consciously admitted what was happening between them. Her entire biology was in rebellion against 3,000 years of genetic modification, every suppressed response pattern flooding back because Marcus existed and her body recognized him as essential. "I want you to survive this," Vera said. "I want the Council to be wrong about you being just genetic material. I want there to be a version of events where consciousness and biology aren't separate commodities. I want—" Marcus kissed her, and the thought dissolved into sensation, his mouth against hers, his hands cradling her face, his warmth and scent and presence overwhelming every optimized system that insisted this was inefficient, irrational, contrary to collective good. They moved together to the contact chamber's rest platform. Marcus's weight against her, her hands on his skin. The discovery that human bodies were warm everywhere, that touch could communicate things language couldn't reach. The monitoring systems recorded everything. Biomarker cascades, neurological activation patterns, the complete biochemical map of what happened when a collective xenobiologist chose connection over protocol. Vera stopped caring what data the Council extracted from this. She'd spent 8 months documenting Marcus's biology. This final session was hers. They stayed tangled together on the rest platform as the countdown timer reached final hours. Marcus's breathing had settled into sleep patterns, his body trusting her enough to release conscious control. Vera stayed awake, her chromatophores dim in the chamber's low lighting, feeling his heartbeat against her skin. The door chime sounded 47 minutes before transfer time. Vera extracted herself carefully, not waking Marcus, and pulled her research suit back into regulation configuration. When she opened the chamber door, Director Salvan was standing in the observation corridor, his chromatic patterns cycling through something she'd never seen from him before. Disapproval mixed with what might have been concern. "The monitoring data from the past 8 hours is unprecedented," Salvan said. "Complete documentation of attachment formation through final intimacy stage. The Council is extremely pleased with your contribution, Dr. Vera." "He's being transferred in 47 minutes, Vera said. Her vocal cords were failing to maintain professional neutrality. "Yes, the timeline proceeds as scheduled." Salvan's patterns flickered towards something almost sympathetic. "I realize this assignment has been difficult. The Council recognizes the personal cost of generating this caliber of research. You'll be granted extended rest period after Subject 12's transfer. Reassignment to standard observation protocols will begin in 30 days. Vera looked back through the chamber door at Marcus's sleeping form. "What if I refuse reassignment?" Salvan's chromatophores went completely neutral. "That's not a viable option. Genetic purpose is absolute. You are optimized for xenobiological research. That optimization is permanent. Genetic optimization can be reversed," Vera said. "The collective has the technology. You proved it by triggering my attachment responses. If suppressed patterns can re-emerge, modifications can be undone." "Theoretically, yes. In practice, voluntary de-optimization is forbidden. It would be choosing individual desire over collective need." Salvan moved closer, his voice dropping to lower frequency. "Dr. Vera, I understand this attachment has become significant. The data clearly shows pair bonding formation, but you must remember, you are not human. You are collective. Your purpose supersedes personal connection. What if I choose differently? Then you will be placed in corrective isolation until your optimization patterns reassert dominance," Salvan said flatly. "Genetic purpose is not optional. The Council will not permit individual choice to undermine species survival." He left before Vera could respond. She stood in the observation corridor and felt the full weight of what the collective actually was. Not a civilization, a machine, built from optimized biology and enforced purpose, and the absolute elimination of everything that made consciousness more than just functional processing. They'd engineered away choice 3,000 years ago and called it efficiency. Marcus was awake when she returned to the chamber. "I heard," he said quietly. "Corrective isolation, forced reassignment. They really don't let you choose anything, do they?" "No," Vera said. "They don't. Then we have 47 minutes. He pulled her back down to the rest platform. They didn't speak, just held each other while the countdown timer marked the remaining time in steady, irreversible progression. At 0, the security team would arrive. Marcus would be transferred to biological repository. Vera would return to her quarters for mandated rest period. The monitoring data would be analyzed, catalogued, utilized to perfect the collective's reproductive intervention programs. Everything would continue exactly as designed, unless she chose something different. The decision crystallized while Marcus slept against her shoulder in the final hour before transfer. Vera's hand had been resting on the emergency release panel, the one built into every contact chamber, for rapid decontamination in case of biological hazard, the one that would flood the entire observation sector with unfiltered air, dissolve the barriers between human habitat and research wing, trigger every safety protocol the station possessed, the one that would give them 3 minutes before security response arrived. Her fingers traced the activation sequence without conscious thought. The monitoring systems would record the decision. Salvan would classify it as psychological breakdown, attachment-driven malfunction of optimized neural pathways. The Council would use it as proof that individual choice undermined collective stability. Vera didn't care anymore what the collective called it. She activated the emergency release, Alarms screamed through the station's corridor systems. Atmospheric barriers dissolved. The reinforced partition between contact chamber and observation deck retracted into wall housing. Suddenly, there was nothing between Vera and Marcus except air and choice, and the timer counting down to inevitable security intervention. Marcus was awake instantly, survival reflexes honed by months of captivity, reading the situation faster than Vera could explain it. "What did you do?" "Gave us 3 minutes," Vera said. "Maybe less. For what?" "To choose something different than what we were designed for." She pulled him toward the emergency corridor access, the maintenance routes that connected every sector of the station, but were rarely used because the collective didn't think in terms of escape. Efficient movement meant direct paths, optimized routes, predictable patterns. The emergency corridors were for equipment malfunction and atmospheric failure, not for xenobiologists choosing individual connection over genetic purpose. They ran. The station's layout unfolded in Vera's enhanced spatial memory. Maintenance Corridor 7 connected to the auxiliary docking bay. The research vessel assigned to her old fieldwork was still there, minimally maintained, probably functional. Probably. She'd disabled its tracking systems 8 months ago during a routine inspection. Minor act of rebellion she hadn't understood at the time. Marcus's hand was tight in hers as they moved through corridors that smelled like recycled air and metal, and the beginning of something the collective's 3,000 years of optimization hadn't predicted. Individual choice. Genuine rebellion. The possibility that consciousness mattered more than collective survival. Security forces would be mobilizing. Salvin would be coordinating response, probably still believing this was temporary breakdown that corrective isolation could fix. The Council would want Vera preserved. She was unprecedented data now, proof that collective biology retained attachment capacity. They'd recover her, treat the episode as research opportunity, eventually stabilize her optimization patterns and return her to standard function, unless she made that impossible. The auxiliary docking bay was empty, except for the small research vessel and decades of accumulated equipment storage. Vera's authorization codes still worked, muscle memory typing in sequences she'd used hundreds of times during her early career. The vessel's systems activated with reluctant compliance, life support coming online, navigation showing viable launch vectors. Marcus was watching her with an expression she couldn't categorize. "Where are we going?" "I don't know," Vera said. "Somewhere the collective doesn't have jurisdiction. Independent colonies, maybe. Or deep space. Somewhere that doesn't require genetic purpose as the price of existence. They'll follow us. You're too valuable as data to just let go." "I know." Vera pulled up the vessel's navigation interface. "But we'll have time. Maybe months. Maybe longer. Time where we're not subjects or researchers or genetic material. Just ourselves." "And then what?" Marcus asked quietly. Vera looked at him across the vessel's small control space. "Then we choose again. Keep choosing. That's what consciousness without optimization actually is. Continuous choice, even when the outcomes aren't guaranteed." Marcus closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face, his warmth solid and real against her skin. "The collective is going to classify you as corrupted, lost to attachment disorder. They'll hunt you the same way they'll hunt me. I know. Your entire civilization will consider you a failure of genetic design. I know. You're giving up everything you were optimized to be." Vera's chromatophores flared bright blue, no suppression, no professional neutrality, just the raw truth of what she'd chosen. "I'm not giving up anything. I'm finally choosing what matters." The vessel's launch sequence was active. Security response would breach the docking bay in approximately 90 seconds. They had just enough time to clear the station's gravity well before intervention became possible. Marcus kissed her, and Vera felt the choice settle into her biology like something that had always been waiting. Not optimization, not genetic purpose, just the messy, inefficient, completely irrational decision to choose connection over function. The vessel launched as security forces reached the docking bay door. Space beyond the collective's controlled sectors was vast in ways that made 3,000 years of civilization feel insignificant. Vera had studied the independent colony networks during her academic training, classified them as primitive compared to collective efficiency. Now she was navigating toward them. the research vessel's limited range forcing careful resource management and creative route planning. Marcus adapted to spacecraft life with the same disturbing competence he'd shown in captivity. He learned the vessel's systems, took over maintenance routines, created efficiency protocols that freed Vera's time for navigation calculations. They developed new routines, meals shared in the small crew quarters, sleep cycles synchronized, the constant awareness of each other's presence in confined space. The intimacy was different here. Not monitored, not documented, not serving any research purpose except their own understanding. Vera learned the specific texture of Marcus's skin in different lighting conditions, the way his body temperature varied with stress levels, the micro-expressions that meant he was thinking about Earth and the billions who hadn't survived. Marcus learned to read her chromatic shifts without translation matrix, understanding that rapid flicker meant anxiety, deep blue meant contentment, green undertones meant she was problem-solving. They talked about futures that might actually exist now, what they'd do when they reach the independent colonies, whether Marcus's engineering background could translate to actual employment, whether Vera's xenobiology training was valuable outside collective frameworks, whether consciousness without genetic purpose was enough foundation to build actual lives on. "The collective will still be looking for us," Marcus said during one rest cycle. They were tangled together on the crew quarters sleep platform, Vera's head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Salvan won't stop. You're too important as research data." "I know." Vera's hand traced idle patterns on his skin, learning the topography of human musculature through repetition and attention. "But the independent colonies have sovereignty agreements. The collective can request extradition but can't enforce it. We'll have time to establish residence, maybe find work, become people instead of genetic material. And if they don't recognize you as a person, you're technically collective property. Optimized biology, assigned purpose, the whole framework. Then we'll find somewhere that does," Vera said. "The galaxy's bigger than the collective's jurisdiction. Somewhere there have to be civilizations that prioritize consciousness over efficiency." Marcus's arm tightened around her. "You gave up everything for this. Your career, your civilization, your entire optimized purpose." "I gave up a life that wasn't mine," Vera corrected. "Everything I was designed to be was chosen by the collective before I had consciousness to question it. This, us, this vessel, the choice to leave, this is the first thing I've ever actually chosen for myself. How does it feel?" Vera considered the question seriously. Her optimized neural pathways had no framework for categorizing this experience. It didn't fit professional satisfaction parameters, didn't register as collective contribution, didn't align with any designed emotional response pattern. "Terrifying," she said honestly, "and necessary, and right in ways that optimization never was." They reached the first independent colony 17 days after leaving the research station. A small settlement on a moon with breathable atmosphere. Population maybe 10,000. Governance structure based on voluntary cooperation instead of genetic assignment. The colony administrator reviewed their asylum request with careful skepticism. "You're collective," the administrator said, looking at Vera. "Optimized xenobiologist. Why would you want to leave that system?" "Because optimization isn't the same as choice," Vera said, "and I chose differently than what I was designed for." "And him," the administrator gestured at Marcus. "Human. Last of his species, as far as we know. You understand the collective has legitimate claim to human genetic material. Harboring him could create diplomatic complications." "He's not genetic material," Vera said firmly. "He's a person, with consciousness and autonomy, and the right to choose his own existence." The administrator studied them both, Vera with her chromatophores cycling through determination patterns, Marcus standing close enough that their shoulders touched, small gesture of unity that spoke volumes about what they'd chosen. "All right," the administrator said finally. "Provisional asylum granted. You'll need work permits, residence documentation, integration into colony resource allocation. And you'll need to understand, if the collective pushes hard enough for extradition, we can't protect you indefinitely." "We understand," Vera said. "Thank you." They left the administrative office and walked through the colony's market sector, dozens of species mixing in voluntary cooperation, choosing their associations instead of following genetic assignments. It was chaotic, inefficient, and somehow more alive than anything Vera had experienced in 15 years of optimized existence. Marcus's hand found hers as they walked. "What now?" he asked. "Now we figure out how to actually live," Vera said. "Without protocols or monitoring or predetermined purpose, just a continuous choice." "Sounds inefficient," Marcus said, smiling. "Completely," Vera agreed. "I'm looking forward to it." The Colony Work Allocation Office found placement for both of them within the first week. Marcus joined the engineering cooperative, maintaining atmospheric processors and water reclamation systems. Vera was assigned to the medical research facility, her xenobiology background valuable for cross-species health protocols, even if her collective training needed significant adjustment to account for patient autonomy and voluntary consent. They rented quarters in the colony's residential sector, 2 small rooms, shared facilities, nothing like the sterile efficiency of the research station. Marcus hung fabric on the walls, colors and textures that served no functional purpose except making the space feel less empty. Vera found herself watching him work, understanding for the first time what human nest-building behavior actually meant, creating environment that reflected choice instead of just accepting assigned space. The routines they built felt different here. Meals were shared preparation, Marcus teaching Vera about human cooking processes, her optimized palate slowly recalibrating to recognize flavors beyond efficient nutrient delivery. Sleep cycles synchronized naturally, their bodies learning to rest together without monitoring systems documenting every biomarker exchange. Work occupied their days, but evenings belonged to them. Conversation, touch, the continuous discovery of what relationship meant when neither person was subject or researcher. 3 months into colony residence, the message came through official diplomatic channels. The collective formally requested Vera's extradition on grounds of genetic property violation and unauthorized removal of valuable research materials. They cited 3,000 years of legal precedent, establishing that optimized biology belonged to collective ownership. That individual choice was subordinate to species survival need. The colony's legal cooperative reviewed the request and found it technically valid under existing sovereignty agreements. Vera sat in their quarters and read the extradition documentation while Marcus worked on repairing their aging cooling unit. The collective's case was comprehensive. Her genetic optimization represented significant resource investment. Her xenobiology training was collective property. Her choice to leave constituted theft of collective assets. They demanded her return for corrective isolation and re-optimization. "They're not wrong," Vera said quietly. "I am technically collective property. Everything I am is the result of genetic modification they invested in. My training, my capabilities, my entire existence was designed and funded by collective resources." Marcus put down his repair tools and crossed to where she sat. "You're not property. You're a person who made a choice. The collective doesn't recognize that distinction. To them, I'm just malfunctioning optimization, something to be fixed and returned to proper function." "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked. Vera looked at him, this human who'd survived species near extinction and captivity, and the complete commodification of his biology, who still somehow maintained enough hope to build nest space in rented quarters and teach her about food culture, and believe that choice mattered more than design. "I want to fight the extradition," she said, "claim personhood independent of genetic optimization. Argue that consciousness creates autonomy regardless of engineered origin. The colony's legal system might not support that argument," Marcus said gently. "Most sovereignty agreements recognize genetic property frameworks. Then we'll find somewhere that doesn't. Keep choosing, keep moving, until we find a civilization that believes consciousness matters more than ownership." Vera's chromatophores flared determined blue. "I didn't leave the collective to surrender the first time they demanded I return." Marcus smiled and pulled her close. "All right then, we fight." The colony's legal cooperative was less optimistic about their chances. The senior advocate explained patiently that while they could file personhood claims and sovereignty challenges, existing legal precedent heavily favored the collective's genetic property arguments. The case might take years to resolve, and even then success wasn't guaranteed. Vera filed the paperwork anyway. The collective's response came within days, not through legal channels, through direct communication to Vera's personal terminal. Director Salvin's message was brief and devastatingly accurate. Dr. Vera, the Council has reviewed your personhood claim and finds it without merit. You are the product of collective optimization, funded by collective resources, designed for collective purpose. Your choice to leave was evidence of attachment disorder, not autonomous consciousness. However, the Council recognizes that corrective isolation may be insufficient to restore proper function. We are therefore prepared to offer alternative resolution. Return voluntarily, accept reoptimization, and Subject 12 will be granted provisional colony residence instead of biological repository transfer. Refuse, and both of you will be classified as fugitive genetic material with retrieval authorization across all collective territories. You have 72 hours to decide. Marcus read the message over her shoulder. They're offering to spare me if you surrender yourself for reoptimization. Eliminate everything that makes you who you are now, and return you to proper collective function. Yes. What are you going to do? Vera looked at their quarters. The fabric Marcus had hung on walls, the cooking implements they'd acquired together, the sleep platform where they'd learned what intimacy meant without monitoring systems documenting everything. Small evidence of choices they'd made, lives they were building, the possibility that consciousness mattered independent of genetic design. I'm going to refuse, she said, and then we're going to run again. Keep choosing. Keep building something that's ours instead of theirs. Marcus's arms came around her from behind, his warmth solid against her back. The collective won't stop. Salvin will keep hunting us. I know. We might spend the rest of our lives running. Never safe, never settled, always looking over our shoulders. I know. You'd give up any chance of stability to avoid reoptimization, Marcus said quietly. To stay who you've chosen to be, instead of what you were designed for. Vera turned in his arms, facing him, her chromatophores bright with determination and fear and absolute certainty. I already made that choice when I activated the emergency release. Everything after is just following through. She sent her refusal to the collective that night. They left the colony before the 72-hour deadline expired, packed their minimal belongings, purchased passage on a freight transport heading toward the outer territories, left no forwarding information. The colony administrator wished them well with the careful neutrality of someone who understood both sides of an impossible situation. The freight transport's captain asked no questions about why two beings from different species were traveling together, with minimal luggage and obvious urgency. Just logged them as standard passengers and assigned them cargo hold sleeping space. The transport ran routes through sectors where collective jurisdiction was theoretical at best, independent settlements, corporate territories, wild space colonies that operated outside any centralized governance. Vera and Marcus spent the journey learning to exist in true uncertainty. No guaranteed destination, no stable residence, no clear future beyond the next transit point. Just continuous choice, repeated daily, building something that looked like life from the small moments between running. They found work where they could. Marcus's engineering skills translated across most technological frameworks. Vera's medical knowledge was valuable in settlements that couldn't afford dedicated xenobiologists. They moved frequently, never staying long enough to establish legal residency, always watching for signs of collective tracking. 6 months after leaving the colony, they received a message through intermediaries. Other beings who'd left the collective, small numbers, scattered across the outer territories, all of them classified as malfunctioning optimization requiring corrective intervention. They'd formed a loose network, sharing information about safe locations and collective tracking patterns, offering community to those who'd chosen consciousness over genetic purpose. Vera read their message in a rented room on a station so far from collective space that their jurisdiction was purely symbolic. Marcus was beside her, his hand warm in hers, small gesture of presence that had become their constant. They want to meet, Vera said. Other collective citizens who chose differently than their optimization. Build actual support systems instead of just running individually. Do you trust them? Marcus asked. I don't know, Vera admitted. But community sounds better than isolation, even uncertain community. They attended the gathering, 17 collective citizens and their chosen companions, meeting in a neutral station's commerce sector, sharing stories of optimization rejected and lives built from continuous choice. Some had been running for decades, others were recent departures, still processing the enormity of what they'd given up and chosen instead. An older collective citizen, optimization scars visible on her skin, spoke about the pattern she'd noticed over 30 years of exile. The collective calls us malfunctioning, corrupted by attachment disorder or individual desire or whatever terminology makes our choice seem like pathology. But we're not broken, we're just conscious. Actually conscious, the way our species was before they optimized consciousness into acceptable function. They'll never stop hunting us, another said. We're too valuable as proof that optimization is imperfect, that individual choice can override genetic design. Then we keep choosing, Vera said quietly. Build networks, support systems, evidence that consciousness without optimization is viable. Show the galaxy that efficiency isn't the only measure of survival. Marcus's hand tightened in hers. They stayed with the network for several weeks, contributing what expertise they could, learning from others who'd navigated this impossible balance longer. Then they moved on, carrying contact protocols and the knowledge that they weren't alone in this choice. Years accumulated into routine, not stable, never predictable, but theirs in ways that collective optimization never was. They found a semi-permanent residence on a wild space station, established professional reputations under assumed identities, built something that looked almost like normal life, except for the constant awareness that the collective was still tracking them somewhere in the background. Director Salvin's final message arrived on their 5th anniversary of leaving the research station. Brief, clinical, carrying no emotional weight despite the content. Dr. Vera, the Council has reviewed 5 years of tracking data and determined that retrieval resources would exceed your value as corrective optimization subject. You are hereby reclassified from fugitive genetic material to acceptable loss. The collective will no longer pursue active recovery. However, should you enter collective jurisdiction, previous ownership claims remain legally valid. Live your inefficient life. Know that it proves our point about optimization necessity. Vera read the message 3 times before showing Marcus. They're giving up, she said, deciding we're not worth the effort to retrieve. How do you feel about that? Marcus asked. Vera considered the question carefully. 5 years of running, 5 years of building life from continuous choice. 5 years of proving that consciousness mattered more than genetic design. The collective would call it acceptable loss, would classify her existence as proof that individual choice led to inefficiency and irrelevance. They'd be wrong. Free, Vera said. I feel free. Marcus pulled her close, and she felt his warmth, his heartbeat, the solid reality of choosing connection over purpose. Her chromatophores flared bright blue. Not attraction markers, not compatibility signals, just the visible expression of what she'd chosen to become. They stood together in their quarters, looking out at the station's observation window where wild space stretched in every direction. No protocols, no monitoring, no predetermined purpose. Just consciousness, choice, and the continuous decision to build something that mattered. What now? Marcus asked. Vera smiled. Now we keep choosing. Every day. That's all consciousness really is. Outside, the stars were infinite and indifferent. Inside, 2 beings from different species held each other and proved that efficiency wasn't the only way to survive.